Today's episode of DRL is brought to you by Hella Cocktail Company. My guests don't just come to DRL for me. They also come for the cocktails. Luckily, my friends at Hella Cocktail Company have my back. These guys make amazing mixes, from Bloody Mary to Margarita to Moscow Mule. They also make cocktail bitters, my secret ingredient, and now yours too. It's easy to feel like the best bartender in town when every bottle comes with a simple recipe on it. Hella Cocktail Company, bold flavor, real ingredients, hospitality. Mixing it up since 2011. Shop the collection on Amazon Prime or use code DRL online at hellacocktail.co for free shipping. Hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome back to another episode of DRL, where we're talking everything dating, relationships, and love. I'm your host, Tennesha Wood. Guess who I have with me today?
Is it your mom or your boyfriend?
I do kind of have y'all both on in heavy rotation sometimes. Well, you guys are like my two favorite guests.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm not Tanisha's mom.
It's Chris. How you been?
I'm good. Actually, I haven't been on in a while. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you popped on for a bit on the last episode with my mom when we called you to get your opinion on whether I was, psychotic in the household or not.
Yeah.
A lot's been changing in the last couple weeks and months here. The kids have moved down to Puerto Rico.
Yeah, the little ones are here. Homeschooling's hard. That's what's different. Anybody out there that's like homeschooling or even doing distance learning from home where they don't even necessarily have to be a big part of the process, it's hard. Hit me up and let me know how hard it is so I can feel better.
I just need to know I'm not the only one.
Based on the memes online, I feel like I'm definitely not. Even a friend who told me that they were homeschooling, like their niece briefly was like, nah, this ain't it.
I actually had an interesting conversation the other day. Let me start off by saying this. We're going to do listener questions today, which is why I have Chris on. But I actually had an interesting conversation with somebody on Instagram the other day, and I wanted to share it with you.
Okay.
So I had posted something that's talked about the fact that I wrote a letter and manifested you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I already existed, but I understand.
I manifested you into this world.
I have a social, I have a DOB.
I manifested you into my life.
Yep. I feel
And she said, well, how did you do that? Like, how do you know that you actually did that and that it wasn't just by happenstance? And I said, because the way I did it, it was so specific that there's no other way this man would have shown up without me putting that out there to the universe. If you've been listening to this podcast for a couple seasons now, you know this story, but I love this story. So I'll repeat a short section of it. But long story short, I wrote this letter one night, essentially talking about the type of man I wanted, but it wasn't a surface letter at all. Like, it was very detailed and deep in terms of the qualities and the type of person that I needed as a partner in my life. Like, it talked about the fact that he would love that I know Drake lyrics and can bust them out at any turn. It talked about the fact that we would laugh together till our stomachs hurt. It talked about the fact that he would be a generous man, not just to me, but to everybody that he came into contact with. It talked about how smart he was, like incredibly smart and intelligent. And then Chris appeared, and he is all those things. So I was like, whoa, it works. So I say all that to say, just as a word of advice, whatever it is that your heart desires, let it be known to the universe. Like, don't keep that bottled up just to you. Like, write it down, like put it out there.
Yeah. To be fair, though, it could have been me manifesting you. That next day, I went to see a friend in Brooklyn, and we were hanging out. And then after that, one of her neighbors was somebody who I knew very well. And so I ended up hanging out with her briefly. And the new guy that she was seeing was going to come over later, which was going to be interesting for him because he was going to be like, oh, hey, who's this guy? Just some dude. We were friends. I saw him briefly for a period of time, but he's going to help sniff you out for me. But anyway, when I left there that Saturday night, which would have been the 8th, like literally right before you wrote the letter, I remember leaving that day and go walking through the snow to the G stop in Bedside, the one with the K, Kosciuszko or whatever it's called.
Kosciuszko?
Something like that. And it being snow on the ground. And I was thinking, I had a fun day today hanging out with my buddies, my female friends. But I was like, I think there's going to be something. I can feel it. And then I got on the train and went home and actually went to sleep early for a change. And then overnight that night, you wrote the letter.
Let's confirm that, because I need to know who manifested this relationship.
It can't be a team effort.
Hold on.
Drum roll, please.
This letter was written on January 8th, 2017 at 10:57 p.m.
Would have been the time I had just thought that and went to sleep. It was the same day. That was a Saturday.
We were both manifesting it at around the same time, I think.
Yeah.
A manifestation.
It's real.
It's real and it works. And I think the first step to that is understanding what you want, and not just what you want, but what your heart truly desires, and then putting it out there.
If you really need like a synopsis of how it works, and it's not the best production ever, but it gives you, and because it's very repetitive, just go watch The Secret. It's not long. It repeats itself a lot.
Yeah.
It's very like, I'm about to sell you something. But it's how it works. It's worth your time. Then you'll understand how to write your own letter.
Yeah.
You should post the letter.
I've thought about that before, because I tell people about the letter so much. And though I put it out there to the universe, and I've definitely shared it with certain close friends, there is something about it to me that like feels incredibly personal. It would be hard for me, I think.
Okay.
And it sort of feels like this is that intimate of a thing where it's like, oh, this means so much to me. I don't know that I want it just in the world. I want it in the universe. I want people to understand the idea of it and the thought process and feelings that went into it. But the letter itself is like very dear to me.
Okay. Put it behind a paywall. Jeez.
For $29.99, you can read my letter.
For 30 days.
Right.
On DocSend.
Right. You can't forward it.
Or download.
Oh, you're funny. I want to get into some listener questions. So the first one is from M. She says, my ex has been contacting me for the past 6 months, pretty much since Corona started. I'm over him and have no romantic feelings for him. It was friendly at first. He was just, quote, checking up on me, and I thought nothing of it. He kept messaging me, and then I went to his page, and it was pretty clear to me that he had a girlfriend. Again, I didn't care because I was over it. After a while, he started flirting and making comments about the sex we used to have and how he misses it. Normally, I would just block him and keep it moving, but I broke up with him because he cheated on me. I don't want him to put another woman through the same BS he put me through. Should I reach out to his girlfriend and tell her what he's been saying? I have screenshots.
At the end of the day, it's for his new girlfriend to make her own assessment. Sometimes the unintended consequence of bringing something to light for somebody is that their general disbelief in your intentions could have the opposite impact. So they'll be like, oh, she's just trying to get him back, or she never really stopped liking him, or he's actually already told me that she would do something like this. And then they just double down in the relationship. And then no matter what he does, it's going to keep getting a pass because she doubled down in that moment. I think it's probably just easiest to just block him and keep it moving. Like, you don't want to get involved. Like, what if she actually finds out that it is true, sees the screenshots and is super pissed, but then also, feels like it's your fault in some amount, or it's all your fault, even though he messed up, and like she might kick him to the curb, but it's your fault. And then now she's coming after you. Now she's stalking your page. She's doing, like, it's not worth it. I would just say, hey, I don't want to get any message from you that couldn't have your girlfriend copied in on it. And if I do receive any more messages from you that aren't appropriate, I am going to send all these screenshots to her. but I don't want to be involved in your relationship. And I don't want to be involved with you.
Yeah, I agree with you. The person who is on the outside of the relationship ends up being the person who gets blamed a lot of the times. And particularly because he has the inside track to be like, oh, I told you she was crazy. I told you she would do something like this. You know me. You don't even know her. Like, we have this thing. Why would I ever? Like, and you know, sometimes men have a way of explaining things away where it's just like, come on, really? That don't even sound right. But M won't have that sort of advantage. And so, yeah, if I were her, I would just leave it alone. I would just say to him, you know what? Apparently you're still on the same things you were already on. And that's really sad for you, and good luck in life. And don't ruin another woman. Goodbye. And I would just, I would block him and just keep it moving. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it would ruin anybody, but it would waste their time and upset them and put them through undue stress, even if it's brief.
It can ruin people, Chris.
I know, but
like
let's not say that's a given.
I'm not saying it's a given, but again, you have to take responsibility for, you know, your own actions and how you see things and how you let them affect you. But potentially a person having their trust broken in that way can really affect how they move forward in other relationships. It shouldn't, but it definitely can. Like, you know, if you're with somebody and you really trust them and then they do something like that, it's then another step and another process for you to open up and trust yourself to trust again, because your instinct is, well, my instinct is off. If this was the person I trusted and this person was able to do this to me, what does that say about me? And then you start questioning your ability to pick people and to trust. Cheating does really affect people.
Of course it does. Of course it does.
Yeah. So.
Block them.
We had an interesting conversation, and I hope you don't mind talking about it. We were talking about the fact that a lot of men do things like this based on like music and the messages they're receiving, that they think they should do this. They think this is how, you know, they sort of gain stance as a man or somebody who has it all and is able to get these women. And it's not even so much that they consciously want to do this, but they feel like in order to somehow elevate to a certain status, that it's almost like a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of imagery that's served up about the black community that's not coming from the black community, or that's about, you know, hip hop culture or things that are related to black culture that aren't coming from black culture. And even sometimes when they seem like they are, the way that it's being curated by people who kind of control the purse strings with regard to like who gets signed, what the release dates are, what the things are going out there, it's curated in a way that it hypersexualizes black people in general. Mm-hmm. It promotes promiscuity. It promotes drug use. I just know that when I was in high school and college, I was deeply influenced by music. If you think about people who are making these things, I mean, they're obviously generally dealing with a lot of trauma. I mean, if you listen to Nas's album, prolific, but clearly as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old or 20-year-old, in some cases of some of the songs, he was even younger than that, hearing what he's saying and how eloquently he's describing it and how intricately, like, those are all traumatic experience after traumatic experience. Like, if you have 16 bars of trauma and it's fire, like, that's great.
That was, like, funny, but also kind of hurt. Like, if you have 16 bars of trauma, like, that's a lot.
Times a whole album, right? And so you got to imagine he's been distilling this his whole life. And this is just one example. And so now you get it as a outsider, and you start digesting it in a different way. You start sort of helping you deal with or cope with the traumas that may be in the same magnitude or smaller, or in the same frequency or less than they are. And it starts molding you and helps you create like a defense mechanism, right? It actually helps you start forming that scar tissue where there's just been a wound that you didn't understand. And when that filter isn't just like somebody reporting on the things that they're seeing and dealing with it their own way, you know, as a writer and an artist and a creative, and you start seeing people like filter, like, oh, well, we don't want to put that message out anymore. We want the message to be this. And the message that they're eschewing is something that's constructive, and the message that they're pushing is something that's destructive. It has an influence. Like, imagine being around a bunch of people who don't have much, right? Like, so say you are growing up in like a project type environment and everybody is starting from the same place for the most part, but regardless of who you are on the inside, regardless of your capabilities, regardless of your level that you could attain to under the right conditions, most people are really precluded from participating in those opportunities to use their skill set. And so what becomes the currency, right? It's not like you're going to, oh, another guy from my building got into Harvard today, right? Whereas like there's neighborhoods where like everybody's waiting on announcement day and like 3 people in the neighborhood are getting into Harvard, 2 are going to Stanford, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And there's neighborhoods where it's like, oh, that one guy made it to college, period.
Right.
Like that's a different thing. So like what becomes the currency? The currency is dictated to you in terms of you're never going to make it out of here. So while you're here, get money, get women, dress a certain way that, you have swag. So it's like if nobody has anything, the person who has a little bit more is like a king, right? If nobody has anything, if you like are juggling 5 women, like that's value. You know what I mean? If nobody has anything, but you got some Dapper Dan Gucci, because you did whatever to get that money and this and that, and like now you're fly, right? That gives you the ability to self-fulfill, to get more money in a lot of ways, and it also gives you the ability to juggle more women if that's what you wanted to do. And so with all these things being like pushed on to folks as like symbols of attainment, it's tough.
That's such a great way to describe it, that the currency is different. But yeah, you're right. One of the currency is like, how many women can you get? Then it's to elevate my status, I have to get X amount of women. And it's almost like you have to keep it up even if you don't want to do it.
Absolutely. And the thing is, if you are actually really attaining like true wealth and true transformation, you wouldn't still live there. Street culture and like street life is real for a lot of people who are going through it. Like they've literally, for whatever set of circumstances, have been precluded from probably being able to participate in the economy in a normalized way.
And the other thing you said the other day that I thought was really interesting was how the biggest consumers of a lot of this rap music are in fact white people who in suburbia, and they use this as a form of entertainment and escapism. Meanwhile, the people who are actually making the music, this is, like you said, they're bars of trauma, right? And I thought about it when you said it, and I was like, I grew up in the suburbs. I think I was that person as well. I think I was that person using this as an entertainment and an escape. Meanwhile, not even really listening to the words and what these people were saying about their own experience and their own trauma. It was just sort of like consuming it, but not understanding even what I was consuming or relating it to the people that it was coming from.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of like two-faced behavior around this, right? So like, I forget who said it. It might've been a comedian or somebody. They were like, they look at like a kid gets a 50 Cent album, sees it on the shelf, and they're like, oh my God, look, it's a real life drug dealer from Queens, and he's been shot, and he's a murderer. Wow. Like, let me go home and open it up. And like somebody said something like that. I was just like, bro.
I wasn't like that, okay? I just want to be clear.
I get it. But I think a lot of times people sort of consume these things and they think of it like it's Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, right? The characters are all known quantities that evolve over the course of the stories and have their own evolution. It's known to not truly exist, right, in a certain way. And like some of the braggadocio, some of the things people talk about having done, they didn't actually do, but they've done parts of it, or it's based on someone else, whatever the case may be. And so there's little bits of elements of like, you don't have to believe this, right? They think of it as wrestling, right? 50 Cent is Hulk Hogan. Jay-Z is, Macho Man Randy Savage. You know what I'm saying? They're characters, you know what I mean? And they're doing something that looks real, but then they're told it's not real.
Right.
But the reality is, it's real to a lot of people.
All right. Anyway, moving on, but just some thoughts and things that we've been talking about over the last couple days here.
Cheating on women is not money. It's not currency. It's not value.
Yeah.
It's just whack.
Cheating is whack, like crack is whack, like Whitney said. Okay. Here is the next question. It says, help. I'm stuck in the talking stage and I can't get up. My last relationship was over 6 years ago, and every man since then has been a random situationship. I don't have trouble meeting men, but it always starts off with potential and never becomes a relationship. How can I stop attracting men that aren't serious? Well, first I'd like to change the language on this a little bit. So not how can I stop attracting men who aren't serious? The question should really be, how do I stop choosing men that I'm not aligned with?
Forget everything that happened before. Put it out of your mind. Meditate away anything that happened that you didn't want to happen and never think about it again. And always assume that the next person you meet has a chance to be the one that you want to meet.
I think it's a bit deeper than that.
That's how you did it.
Well, I did also have to take the time to recognize what had gone wrong for me in the past, or what I was thinking and feeling that would lead me in a path to somebody who isn't aligned with me at all.
So you went in to find out what you actually wanted and got rid of the things that you thought you wanted that you didn't really want.
Right. But I think what I would say for her is understand why you were choosing the people that you were choosing.
Yeah.
Was that from some trauma that you had from a past relationship, from family, from childhood? Like, what is it about those people that you were choosing that made you choose them? What was the quality, or what did you feel like you were lacking?
Right. Well, one thing I would say from my own personal experience, and I don't know if this is the story of the person on this message, but it's really easy sometimes because you know everything about yourself, right? You know every imperfection, you know every shortcut you've ever taken, you know every mistake you've ever made. And it's fine to keep yourself to a high standard. It's fine to like challenge yourself to do better. It's fine to make goals that are a stretch and maybe not get them, but get close, whatever, however you want to call it. But it's not fine to ever think that you don't deserve one thing because of something else. And I think sometimes, and something that I've noticed in my own self, is I might not have approached a certain person because of what I thought I deserved. Or I might have stayed in something longer because of what I thought I deserved, or that I needed to overcome anything within that because of other things that I had done in my life. Where it's like, things aren't supposed to ever be super smooth for me. I'm always going to need to have to work through stuff. And like, once I've worked through it and it stops happening, then I know that I'm like even and like right. I've made up for it. Like
compiling every mistake that you had maybe made in the past and using that as a justification for why this shouldn't be as smooth as it could be.
Right. And I think the first thing I needed to do in that was forgive myself for things, because I often found that the people who were on the other side of those things had long since forgiven, or it wasn't even as bad to them as I thought it was. And so like presupposing how somebody felt about something or what the impact of that was. And I oftentimes found that like unintentionally certain things that I was like super obsessed about, like, oh man, I like made some huge mistake. When you ended up like sort of like doubling back to have conversations with people to like kind of just selfishly rid myself of those feelings, found out that it was like serendipitously like the thing that led them to something else, or they didn't even remember because it wasn't even a big deal, or they didn't even think that it happened that way. Right. And at the time they didn't either, but maybe I didn't approach them or go around them again because I thought, oh man, I messed up.
Did you ever feel like some of the people you chose that might have not been right for you is because you were familiar with it? Right. So a lot of the times when people keep choosing the same person over and over again, it's not because they like that type of person. It's because they're just so familiar with who that person is, and they're familiar with that type of behavior, that type of treatment. So sometimes they'd rather stick with the familiar bad than the unfamiliar good. They'd rather just stay in that place of like, well, I know what this is. So even if this is like a man that doesn't want to commit or cheats or whatever it might be, I've been here before. Whereas if it's somebody that, you know, treats you how you want to be treated and is amazing and is on the same page as you, you might almost be suspicious of their behavior because you haven't seen it before. You're like, well, why are you being so nice? What did you do? What are you up to? And you start questioning it simply because it's unfamiliar. So I think a lot of the times when people just keep choosing the same person over and over again, it's just because you're familiar with being treated that way. And you need to unfamiliarize yourself with being treated in a way that you don't deserve.
This could be a pattern that's not necessarily like bad. So for example, you could be meeting a lot of people who are great, but just you're not for you, or you're not for them, or a little bit of both, right? And I feel like I've met a lot of like really great people in my life that ultimately I wasn't for them, or they weren't for me, or whatever it was on the margin, it just didn't work. And like, yeah, some of the next choices might have been very similar to that because of how the genesis was, but nothing like bad happened, right? And so like beating yourself up because it doesn't end in marriage. A dozen plus years ago when I was like in my late 20s, I was like, for whatever reason, I was like, I feel like I need to be married. I'm married by the time I turn 30. Like, this is crazy. What is wrong with me? I don't know why I thought that, but I just really was like, I have to do this.
I think I know why you had that particular feeling at that particular time in your life where you were like, oh, I have to get married. So earlier when we were talking about sort of the music and the effects of it, at that point in your life, the currency was the type of women or money. And then I think once you were in, you know, your late 20s and 30s, I think with where you were in life, like you were working in corporate America and, you know, working on Wall Street. And I think maybe the currency had shifted in your life. So you have this job, you have this place, you have this woman, so you need to have this family, and the currency just became that for you, and you felt like, oh my God, I'm falling behind. I don't have the clout or currency that maybe the people in my circle now do.
Who knows exactly why? Because it's so long ago actually now, but just because it doesn't end in an engagement or a marriage doesn't mean that that's a failure, right? It's just something that happened along that way. It doesn't necessarily mean that something bad happened either. Like, but if it did, then yeah, you got to do the introspective thing.
It's not a failure, but it is a question, right?
Yeah.
So you haven't failed by not being married, but you do have to question why you are continuing to entertain things in your life that aren't aligned with what you actually want. Like, what's the disconnect there? I want one thing, but I'm not getting that. Why am I not getting the thing I want? Also, don't shy away from what you actually want. If a relationship is what you want, eventually, like, say that. Don't shy away from that or like, oh, I don't know if that's what he wants. Well, if that's not what he wants, then keep it pushing.
Yeah.
But don't ever be afraid to say what you actually want. A closed mouth never gets fed. And don't hope. Like, I think a lot of women get into these types of situations and then they hope that by giving and giving and giving, so whether that be their time, their resources, their bodies, they just keep giving and they hope that by giving these things, eventually the man will just give in and say, oh, okay, I see how great she is now. But that's not the case. What you're teaching them by continuing to give and give and give and not getting what you want in return is that it's okay. Is that it is okay for you to treat me in the way that you're treating me, and I'll stick around. You don't have to give me anything. It's fine. You teach people how to treat you, and don't teach them that a relationship is not a reciprocal thing, because it is.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's totally fine, in my opinion, to tell someone, like, look, I'm more than happy. I'm happy to go on 1 or 2 dates for fun and have a good time with anybody. But like, I'm not just dating for sport. So like, if we're gonna like be seeing each other repeatedly, like, for me, that's in the context of like evaluating a serious relationship. It's not for sport. And I think that's a fair thing to put out there. And I think people sometimes shy away from doing that because there's so many mantras, right? They're all weird, right? So like it used to be back in the day, like you get someone's number, you don't call them for at least 3 days. Why? That's ridiculous. I never did anything stupid like that. That's crazy. I might call you right when I get home. But then if you watch TV, right, or talk to certain people, they make that seem crazy. And then you second guess yourself. Anyway, a lot of stuff can happen.
There's an invented game, and then there's invented rules for the invented game. And all that happens is it puts on more layers and layers and layers so that it takes longer to actually get to who that person really is.
Yeah.
Don't play games.
If you fill your worldview by things that just been whispered down the lane, you don't even know why you're making these choices or doing these things, and like you're really not even living your own life. So like take control of your own life, make your own rules, and don't allow anybody to make you feel bad for that.
Yeah. Agreed. So in conclusion to the actual question, it's examine why you're choosing these men. When you do move into the next relationship or date, don't let it become a situationship by first stating your needs up front.
Absolutely.
Okay. Last question. So this one is from Gerald, and he says, DRL is always on my weekly rotation, and thanks for putting out some necessary knowledge. Well, thank you, Gerald. I want to first say that I love strong women who know what they want, which is one of the things that attracted me to my girlfriend. We've been together for a few years, and for the last year, she won't stop asking me about when we're getting engaged. It's not only annoying, but it's making me question whether I actually want to marry her. Every time someone we know gets married or engaged, it's all she talks about and makes sure to let me know that they've been together for a shorter time than we have. I love her and want to be with her, but I'm not certain about marriage and I need more time to decide. Maybe you could do a show about how women should stop comparing engagements, weddings, and relationships and just be happy if they're in a good situation. Well, thanks for the suggestion, Gerald.
Right. Absolutely. I think the most important thing is determining whether or not they're more interested in the person or more interested in the idea of a marriage. And if you're more interested in the person, to a certain extent, the marriage part will take care of itself. If you're more interested in the marriage, then that's not necessarily healthy for you or your partner, as is being expressed here. But on the other side, in my opinion, you also have to wonder exactly why you might not be ready, even given the first time she asked. The first time she asked you, it couldn't have been a pattern yet, and it couldn't have been annoying. It was the first time. Like, right. Hey, what did you... that's so cute. They got married. Oh, my God. Oh, they were together for 2 years. That's great. We've been together 2 years. It couldn't have been annoying the first time because it hadn't been a pattern yet. And so how did you feel then? And if it's been only happening for the last year and you'd already been together for several years, how did you feel the first time she said it? And if you felt the same way now as you did the first time, then maybe you actually don't want to marry this woman. So she needs to figure out what's the most important thing, the relationship or being married, the person or the idea. And you need to decide whether it's the fact that she's been asking you repeatedly that's bothering you, or it's bothering you because you felt uncomfortable because the first time she said it, you actually didn't want to marry her, but you just hadn't really come to grips with that yet. And that the more she's saying it, it's not that it's because she's being annoying about it or you're questioning her intentions, because you might not know yet. It's just that it's reminding you more and more that you don't want to do it.
I want to ask you a question that I want a man's opinion on. I often hear from men that when they do meet the person that they are supposed to marry, they just know, right? So a lot of situations where a guy has been with a woman for years and years, They don't get married. He says he's not ready. He you know, the same situation that's essentially going on here. Then the next relationship he's in, they're together 6 months, a year, boom, they're married, boom, they got a baby. All the things the previous woman wanted. And it's often said by men that, oh, well, I knew from the moment I met her. It was never going to be about the time. It was never any of that. I just knew from the moment I met this woman, I was going to marry her. So do men then know from the moment they meet somebody that they're not going to marry them? Does Gerald know he probably doesn't want to marry this woman? Did he already know that? Is this not new information?
I'm not sure. And look, he might also just be sensing that her intentions are more focused on the idea of being married and having a wedding than the fact that they have a great relationship.
No, but
if
okay.
they do. So I'm just throwing that out
Yeah.
there. But yes, sometimes, in my opinion, men know when they meet someone that that's someone that they want to marry. Oftentimes, what is more likely, in my opinion, and again, I can't speak for everyone, but based on what I've seen.
I need you to speak for all men now, Chris.
Based on the people who I know and my own observations and having talked to a lot of people about this type of thing, I think men are ready when they're ready. And it almost has sometimes nothing to do with the person. So, and sometimes they're ready because they realize that they should have been ready in the last thing. And so now they're just ready. And so when they do meet that person, they're like, I just knew from the time I met them that I was going to marry them. It's like, yeah, because you were actually just ready.
So you knew you were ready. You didn't necessarily know this was the person. It was just the person you happened to be with when you were ready.
Exactly. So this is what me and my friend Indy, shout out to Indy, would call the launching pad relationship. Mm-hmm. So everything's perfect about it. It generally lasts 4 to 6 years, and then it goes away for reasons that probably could have been remedied if they had been married a year earlier. So if they would have got married a year earlier, they would have went through it. They would have been through it, and then it'd be fine. But because they didn't, things dissolved, and then the next relationship that either one of them in, generally the man first, they just get married. Boom, straight up. And it's because a lot of times they have that kind of FOMO and that guilt of messing the last thing up. And so they are like, I'm not going to miss my countdown. They're on a countdown now. It's like a spaceship. It's going to take off at that time. And the next person that comes through the door at the time that the ship's ready to take off is going to space.
It's like the analogy on Sex and the City with the taxi light.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, the second his taxi light comes on and he's ready, the next person that comes in that taxi is the person that he's marrying.
Yeah.
So has nothing to do with the person. It's just, is my light on or is my light not on? And all the women that he was dating before then, they were getting into a taxi where the light wasn't on. Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because there's a lot of reasons that push people to turn the light on, if you would, or start the countdown. And a lot of times the previous person will think, well, what did I do wrong? Why could I have been better? Da, da, da. And don't beat yourself up. Like, it just happens.
Yeah. Okay. The first thing I really want to say to women out there that are or might be in this situation is, if you have to ask or pressure a man to marry you or nag him about marrying you, I'm just going to say this plainly. He doesn't want to marry you. A man that wants to marry you will marry you if that's what you want. Like, period, point blank. There's no convincing that has to occur. I'm not selling you, some class for $29.99 and I have to convince you to buy. Like, no. A man who wants to marry you will marry you.
Except in certain situations, if he knows about prerequisites and like things that he might need to do in order to be able to look that person in the eye and say, yes, I listened to everything that you said that you wanted to do. I listened to all the things that you said that you'd want me to have in the way that you see that I should have them. And I'm still getting that together. that's fair. But that's a conversation you can have.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying certainly there aren't situations like that. But in that case, a man isn't going to shy away from the conversation. If you come to a man and you say, hey, I just want to talk about like where you see this going, or like, is marriage something we want? Is that what we want to move towards together? A man who actually wants to marry you and can't for whatever reason at that moment will say that. Like, yeah, I want to be with you, but like, I'm trying to pay down my loans. I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to buy us a house. I'm trying to, whatever it is that he is trying to do in order to make the marriage or partnership what it needs to be to continue it, he will say that. A man who shies away from the conversation or says like, oh, why are you always talking about your friends getting married? Like, he don't want to marry you. Keep it moving.
Some of these things are sensitive. Some of these things could feel emasculating or embarrassing to share. But if you're really going to share a life with someone, sometimes you got to make yourself vulnerable.
Yeah.
Listen to more Drake, old Drake. He knows how to make himself vulnerable.
And the other thing too that I wanted to say about this is
you just didn't even bite at that.
I'm sorry. I was thinking.
She's so over
Sorry.
Drake.
Sorry. I wasn't even. Okay. Repeat the Drake line.
No, there was no Drake line.
What did you say? I'm sorry. I was thinking about this. I was
You're just so over Drake. I'm just surprised. Your fans need to know. She's over Drake, and it's a problem.
I'm not like over him. I just like, back in the day, let me tell you what happened when the Take Care album came out. I remember this is when I was living in California, and I actually still bought the CD. This was probably in 2011 that this came out. And I went to Best Buy. I bought the CD.
Now I'm questioning marriage. I'm kidding.
And the CD came out. I sat in the parking lot in my car, listened to the entire album, went through the what do you call the things in the CD cover with the like the whole pamphlet with the songs and the lyrics? What do you call that?
Credits, the insert.
Anyway, I went through the entire insert and just loved it. And I loved every song and I don't know, I just don't feel like that anymore. Like I don't the other day, like he came out with an album and I didn't even know for like days.
Wow.
I know, it's crazy.
I think it's the baby.
Is it?
Yeah.
Do I feel like it's just like not a thing for me anymore? And I
think it took away his like desirability level down. And so if you lose your black female fans, you lose everybody.
Yeah.
And so they kind of.
I don't think it was the baby. I think it was the baby mom.
That's fair.
I think that's what it was.
Either way, he got knocked down a couple levels.
If he would have had a baby with Rihanna, I think I might still be out there just rocking with him. But I think I was just
not on Rihanna's level.
I think I was just maybe like, you know what? I know exactly what it is. I know exactly why I was over that situation. So I think for me, in any person that I am a fan of, it's because I can see that person fitting into my life, right? Whether that be in like a romantic way or a friendship or whatever it might be. Part of the crew. I could see that person sort of in my life, which is why I let them in my life by consuming them in some way. And I think once Drake had a baby with this woman, I was just kind of like, yeah, you're not really like a dude I would like be with or like a friend I would really hang around with because I don't know that your life choices are great. Which is kind of, I feel kind of bad saying that. But, I'm very selective about my circle and the people that I, have relationships with. And I don't, sorry.
Yeah, it's kind of like that one dude, the actor from Insecure, who basically like never posts his girlfriend or fiance or wife or whatever.
And I feel some type of way about that.
But you know why though?
But I know why he doesn't do it.
Because you're more desirable as a leading man in Hollywood or even a supporting role, but a main role in Hollywood as an attractive person if people think of you as desirable. And you're more desirable single than you are with somebody. Okay. Until you get to a certain age. I mean, he's almost 40, but he plays like late 20s characters.
Okay, let's dissect that a little bit. The person you're talking about is Jay Ellis, who plays Lawrence on the show. And on his Instagram and his social media, he never posts anything about his relationship. And as a celebrity, on a certain level, you could be seen as maybe like a sex symbol or, a guy, the type of guy that people would want. And sometimes that's based on who you actually are. And sometimes people are basing this completely on your character in the show or movie that you're in.
And he has a lot of explicit sex scenes. Nobody wants to see him with his girlfriend on Instagram.
In this case, he is in a relationship with, I believe, a woman who is white, or looks white at least. I don't know for sure. But I think that the reason that he probably doesn't post it is not because he's afraid of, people knowing that he's in a relationship and therefore he would alienate fans that prefer him single. I don't think that's it. I think most of the people that watch Insecure are Black women. I think most of the fans are Black women. And I think that him posting pictures of and really just putting his relationship out there with a non-Black woman might leave a bad taste in some fans' mouths, and he ain't trying to risk anything in his career over it. How do you feel about that?
I think a lot of people do it.
But I think it's a race thing, not a relationship thing. I think if he were with a Black woman, married to, I think he would post that because that would actually increase the fan base.
Right. Potentially.
It wouldn't harm it, I don't think.
Well, then they'll think about this. On the other side of the spectrum, a couple years down the road in the sex symbolness, you have Omari Hardwick, right? Who's been a sex symbol in many different shows. And he continues to enjoy an immense amount of popularity, despite the fact that he posts his interrelational relationship all the time. But also, if you think about the timing, it's a couple years from now before Jay Ellis is in that age range. And so I think, and a lot of the sex symbolness was also on shows like Being Mary Jane and other things that he might have been on. And so I think when he develops his fan base stronger and he's a little older and the sex is not necessarily as important, the sex appeal isn't necessarily important as his draw, he'll do it. And I think Omari Hardwick, if you go back and look, there was a progression. That's the only reason why I say it might not be a race thing. It might be like a where you're at in your career, age, and positioning thing. Okay,
as a Black woman, I'm going to say this. And I'm pretty sure, based on my conversations with other Black women, that it's felt among a certain group of people, right? But I think as a Black woman, when you see a man who could be a potential for you, his type could be a potential for you, right? Not necessarily theoretically, his type could be potentially what you might like. When you see him with a white woman, I think then in your mind, you automatically say, oh, he's not my type. He automatically moves from being your type. In my mind, when I'm like, oh, he's not for me. He doesn't want me. So I keep it pushing. And I don't even think of him as like a person that would be attracted to me and that I would be attracted to. Now, obviously, there are people who date a myriad of people and races, and he could be dating a white woman today and next month be dating a Black woman, and that's fair. That's there. And I'm just saying, from the perspective of many Black women I know, once you see that, the assumption is made like, yeah, it's not for me, not my thing. That's what he likes.
Yeah, look, I think it's fair. Look, if you can hold, Sephora accountable for not having Black makeup for however long, right, in multiple shades, or Maybelline, whoever, then I think every entertainer is their own brand. And so to a certain extent, you can hold them accountable for their professional actions. It just really gets hard to say, you could tell like a CEO, like, hire some Black people into your C-suite, hire some women into your C-suite. You can't tell a CEO, marry a Black woman. Like, that's crazy.
Now, somebody reached out to me the other day. This was a man, and he said, I think that you should do an episode about how much of a double standard exists. He said, sometimes I date white women, and I get a lot of backlash for that, but I see all these Black women, famous or otherwise, dating white men, and they're uplifted by Black women when they do this, but I'm pushed down by black women when I do the same thing.
Because they'll be like, yeah, girl, go ahead. Yeah, these dudes ain't about nothing. You got to move on sometime. And it's like, wait a minute, what?
And then so I said to him, this guy, I said, I like this topic. Let's talk about it. Come on the podcast. And he said, well, I don't want to be beat down by this. No, I'm not coming on the podcast. So essentially he was saying, for the same reasons that I'm saying this happens, that's the reason I wouldn't want to be the person coming on and discussing this, because he was scared that he would face some sort of backlash for talking about, mostly or exclusively dating white women.
It's a tough topic.
Yeah.
And I think there is a double standard. I haven't really thought a lot about it, but I guess we can do that for the next episode.
Yeah. I know you got to run, so I won't keep you. Appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, this was fun.
Giving some insight. Where can people reach you?
Tennesha tags me plenty. I don't need to be reached.
Reach Chris on my tags.
Basically. Nobody want to talk to me about nothing. They hear me when they want to hear me on your show, and that's it.
All right. Well, thank you, babe. I love you.
Love you too.
And please reach out to me at Tennesha Wood on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and let me know what you think of today's show. And until next time, wish me love. Hello again, my lovely listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of DRL. If you like the show, be sure to go on iTunes and leave a rating and also write a review. And don't forget to share with your friends and tell them all about DRL. Thank you so much for supporting.